Hello everyone, this is Mr. McMillan, and this is essentially part 2 of the instructional video on triangle congruence, postulates, and theorems. This time we're going to be talking about some example problems. Now, if you feel you're ready to do certain things with this, once you get through some of these problems, then that's fine, you can move on. Okay, so make sure that you watch this video enough, especially with this, because this is important as well, how you can determine the additional information that's required to know. These first handful of problems, and by handful I mean 16 problems, but we're going to be working through them together, want us to determine if the two triangles are congruent. If they are, it wants us to state how we know. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be using one of those 5 postulates that we have, the side, 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 angle, angle, side, angle, 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 side, and hypotenuse leg. Okay, so let's look at the first one here. So remember that the first thing it asked you for, or what you need to look for, is information that's presented to you in the diagram, if there's any. Okay, so the first thing that I like to look out for is congruency marks, right? And if we look here, we see that we have a side that's congruent here and here. And I'm just going to highlight this, the side and the side. But we also see that we have 2 congruent angles here. We'll put that in red just to differentiate it a bit. Angle, angle. Now, that's not the only information that this problem gives you. While you may be going, well, that's all the markings. Yes, that's all the markings. But look at these 2 triangles. These 2 triangles share a side, right? They share a side. This side here is shared. And a shared side counts as congruent for both triangles. So this is a side and this is a side. Okay. Now, let's look at the information that we have. We have 2 pairs of congruent sides, and we have 1 pair of congruent angles. Now, the congruent angles, do you notice how the congruent angles touch the sides? Do you notice how they're in between the 2 sides here? So this is SAS, which is side, angle, side. That's how they would be congruent. Okay. All right, let's look at number 2. Number 2, the first thing that's going to pop out to us is that we have this right angle here. So we're dealing with a right triangle. And we know this has to be a right angle as well because these 2 angles are vertical. Okay. So I'm going to put that in purple here. So that also has to be a right angle because they're vertical. And then here, what we're looking for, we're looking to see if we have a hypotenuse leg situation or if we have a different type of situation. So let's see if we have a hypotenuse and a leg matched up here. Now remember, your hypotenuse is opposite of your right angle. Well, are congruency markings on those hypotenuses, and are they the same congruency markings? Yes, they are. So we're going to put this here. That's our hypotenuse. This is our hypotenuse. Whoops. And then do we have a pair of legs? Now, it doesn't matter which pair is congruent as long as one of the pairs is congruent. And yes, we do. We have a leg here, and we have a leg here. So what this one will be, this one is hypotenuse leg, or HL for short. I don't care which one you write. Normally people just opt to do HL, SAS, whatever. As long as you understand what those mean, that's what matters. All right, let's look at number 3. Number 3, we have 2 triangles here. Now, if you notice here, the 2 triangles are right triangles, correct? But you'll also notice here that we only have one set of sides that's marked. We don't have two sets of sides. In order to be hypotenuse leg, we would have to have at least two marked, because this one would have to be marked and this one would have to be marked. So just because these are right triangles doesn't mean this is hypotenuse leg. So let's look and see what it is. Well, or if it's anything. So we have here, we have an angle here, and that matches up with this angle here. And we have this side here, and this side here. And then we have two right angles here. Now we know those angles are congruent, so we know we have another angle here and another angle here. So we have two congruent pairs of angles, and we have one congruent pair of sides. Now, is that pair of congruent sides, is it between the two angles on both of them, or is it outside of the two angles? Well, if we look here, we have ASA, ASA, so we see that the side touches both of the angles. So that means that we are dealing with angle, side angle, or ASA. All right, let's look at number 4. Let's see if this one's anything. So here we have a triangle and we have our diagram markings here. So we know that this is an angle and this is an angle, right? Now we don't see any other markings here, right? We don't see any vertical angles, anything else, but we do see a shared side. So we know that these have to be congruent. Now, if you remember, how many pieces of information do you need to show that triangles are congruent? Well, you need at least 3 pieces of information. How many pieces of information are we given here? We're only given 2 per triangle. We're not given enough information to show whether those are congruent or not. So we write not enough info, or you can just write NEI. Okay. So number 5. Number 5. Number 5, we have a pair of congruent angles here, A and A. Then we have another pair of congruent angles here. And then finally, we see that we have a shared side right here. So we have 2 pairs of congruent angles and 1 pair of congruent sides. Those 1 pair of congruent sides, are they between the 2 angles? Are they outside of it, or is there not enough information? Well, we see that the sides are between the 2 angles for each one. Notice how that side touches both of the angles for both of the triangles. So that means that we have angle, side, angle, or ASA for this one. Number 6. Number 6, we have an angle here and an angle there. We have an angle here, an angle here. There's no other markings, but we do see that we have a shared side that's running right through the middle there diagonally. So we're going to put a congruency marking on that, and we're going to label it with an S. So we have 2 pairs of congruent angles and 1 pair of congruent sides. Now, those 1 pair of congruent sides, are they between the 2 angles, or are they outside of the 2 angles? They're not between it. Well, if you look here, they would have to touch, the sides would have to touch both of these angles to be in between, and we see that they only touch this one. Okay, so these are not in between, so that means we're dealing with angle, angle, side, or AAS. Okay. Number 7. Number 7, the first thing that's going to stand out to us is that we have a pair of vertical angles here. So we're going to immediately put those as congruent, because remember, vertical angles are always congruent. Now, excuse me for the coughing. Now we have another pair of congruent angles here that's marked on the diagram. And then we have a pair of congruent sides here. So we have two pairs of congruent angles, and we have one pair of congruent sides. Are those sides in between the two angles, or are they not between the two angles? Well, if we look here, this one's outside of the two angles, this one's outside of the two angles, so they match. So that means we're dealing with angle side once again, or AAS. Number eight, we have what looks to be two right triangles. Now we have to see if we have a hypotenuse leg situation or if it's something else. Well, we only have one angle here that's congruent, right? So it can't be, if anything, it would have to be side angle side. But if we look here, we have this shared side here. Is that a hypotenuse or is it a leg? Well, if you draw your arrow opposite from the right angles, that would be your hypotenuse. And then that means that these two would be your legs. So we're dealing with hypotenuse leg, or HL. Okay, so that's the first 8. I hope that you're getting an idea of how to do this. I would like you to try the next 8 on your own. Okay, try the next 8 on your own. See what you can do with them. And if, you know, if you're stuck or whatever else, I mean, that's fine. Okay, that's how we learn. So pause the video, try these, and then make sure, then come back and check your answers to see if you're correct. All right, so let's look at number 9. Number 9, we have two triangles here. They don't share any sides or points or anything like that, so we're just going based on what we're given. Well, we're given a congruent pair of sides here. The tick mark. I do apologize for the coughing. And then we have a congruent pair of angles here. And then we have another pair of congruent sides here. Okay. So we're given two pairs of congruent sides and one pair of congruent angles. Now, the only way this will work is if those angles are between the two sides. Are the angles for both of these between the two sides? Well, if you look here, the way we've drawn it, or the way it's drawn, we see that the angle touches both of the sides. It's in between the two sides on both of the triangles. So that means that we have side angle side, or SAS. Number 10, the first thing that should stand out to you here is that we have a pair of vertical angles. So we have some angles there. Then we have another pair of angles here that are congruent. And then we have a pair of sides here that are congruent. So we have two pairs of congruent sides, or sorry, excuse me, two pairs of congruent angles and one pair of congruent sides. Are the sides, where are the sides located? Are they in between or are they not in between? Well, if we look at our diagram, we see that the side touches both of the angles on both of them, so that means it's in between. So we're dealing with angle, side, angle here. Number 11. Number 11, we see first off that we have a shared side. I'm going to go ahead and mark that. So we have a side and a side there. Then we have a congruent pair of angles here. And then we have a congruent pair of sides. Now remember that they have to match, okay? So if one of them's between, then the other has to be between, and so on and so forth. So let's look at this one. We have two pairs of congruent sides, and we have one pair of congruent angles. Now look here at this bottom triangle. This bottom triangle, the angles are between the two sides. Is the same thing true for this triangle? Well, no. The two triangles here, this one has it between, but this one, the angle is outside of it. So that means that we cannot conclude anything based on this. So this would be not enough information, or NEI. Okay. Number 12, we see that we have a pair of vertical angles here. So we have angle and angle. We have another pair of angles here. And then we have a pair of sides here. Remember, the triangles have to match. So let's look here. We have two congruent pairs of angles and one congruent pair of sides. Well, we have two congruent pairs of angles. Are the sides in between the angles, or are they outside of the angles? And if we look here, we see that both of those are only touching one of the angles. So that means that we have angle, angle, side as our postulate, or AAS. Okay. Number 13, we see immediately that we have a set of vertical angles. So we're going to go ahead and draw that in. Now, we only have one pair of sides that are congruent, so this cannot be hypotenuse leg, even though we have two right triangles. So we're going to put an angle here, angle here. Okay. Then we have another pair of angles here that are congruent. And then we have another pair, or we have a pair of sides that are congruent here. So we have two pairs of congruent angles, one pair of congruent sides. Are the sides in between the two angles, or are they outside of the two angles? Well, if you look here, the sides are in between the two angles. So that means that we're dealing with angle, side, angle, or ASA. Number 14, we see immediately that we have a shared side, so we're going to go ahead and mark that. Then we have, excuse me, and then we have a congruent pair of sides here and here. I'll go ahead and make this red as well. And then we have a congruent pair of sides here and here. So we have three pairs of congruent sides. The only one that deals with that is side, 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 or SSS. Okay. Number 15. Number 15, we see that we have one congruent pair of angles, or we have a congruent pair of sides because it's a shared side here. I'm going to label that. And we have one congruent pair of angles here and one congruent pair of angles here. So we have two congruent pairs of angles, one congruent pair of sides. So that means that we are looking to see where the sides are, if they're between or outside of the angles, and we see that they are between. So this would be angle, side, angle, or ASA. And then finally, number 16. Number 16, we want to see here, we have a pair of vertical angles here. We have a pair of congruent sides here. And we have a pair of congruent sides here. So we have two pairs of congruent sides, one pair of congruent angles. Are the angles between the two sides? Yes, they are on both of them. So that means we're dealing with side, angle, side, which is SAS. Okay. All right, now let's look at the next 8. Be the last 8 that we do. Just kind of showing you this, just so you know, just in case a problem comes up like this, and they will. State what additional information is required in order to know that the triangles are congruent for the given reason. So it gives you a given reason and a diagram here. The first thing you want to do is try and label what you have. So if you look here, in your diagram, you have a shared side. And then you have one pair of congruent angles. Now, look at the positioning of what you have. You have ASA. Now, we already have the side, so we need a pair of angles because we need 2 pairs of angles here. Well, based on the positioning here, the side would have to be in between. They'd have to be in between the 2 angles. And the only way that's going to happen is if these 2 angles right here are congruent to one another. So that means that angle VKJ has to be congruent to angle LJK. Okay, that's the only way that's going to happen. These 2 angles being congruent would make it angle, angle, side, but it wants angle, side, angle. Number 18. Number 18, we want hypotenuse leg. Well, here we have our right angle. And is this a leg or is it a hypotenuse? Well, it's not opposite the right angle, so it's a leg. So in order to get that, we need the hypotenuse because we're missing the H. So that's opposite here. So we need these 2 to be congruent to one another. So that means MN has to be congruent to UV. Next up, number 19, side angle side. We have a pair of vertical angles here. Then we have a pair of congruent sides here. And it wants us to do it by side angle side. We have the pair of angles already taken care of. We need a pair of sides. Well, the angle has to be in between the 2 sides, and the only way that that's going to happen is for the other side that touches the angle, this one here, is congruent to sandwich the angle between the 2 sides. So that means that CD has to be congruent to TD. Okay, and then number 20, and then you're going to try the last 4. Number 20, we have angle, side, angle. We're given an angle here, an angle here. We're given a congruent pair of sides here and here. So we have one congruent pair of sides already, and it says that it needs to be between the 2 angles. So the other angle has to touch that side. So we already have I here. We need H and B to be congruent. So angle H has to be congruent to angle B. Okay? So I want you to try the next 4. So pause the video, try these out, and then check and see if you're correct. All right, let's look at number 21. It wants angle, angle, side. We see here that we have a shared pair of sides. So those are congruent. And we're given 2 angles here and here. Now this one wants angle, angle, side. We already have the side taken care of, and the side needs to not be between the 2 angles. Well, there are 2 different angles you could pick from here. You could either pick these 2 here, or you can pick these 2. Okay, that way you have angle, angle, side. Either way it works. So you could have either angle IGH is congruent to angle BGH, or you could have BHG is congruent to angle IHG. Okay. Number 22. Number 22, we have a pair of congruent angles here. We have another pair of congruent angles here. So that it wants us to do angle, angle, side. So we already have two pairs of congruent angles, so we need a congruent pair of sides. Now the sides cannot go between the two angles. So that TU and IJ are off limits, but these other two will work. So if you do US, U touches this A or this red angle here, and IK does as well. So US will be congruent to IK, or you could do the other side that you don't have marked here. So you could do TS is congruent to JK. All right, number 23. We have a pair of vertical angles in 23 here. And we have a congruent pair of sides as well. And we want to do angle, side, angle. So we need one more pair of congruent angles. And the side has to touch it because it has to be in between the two angles. So that means that angles X and A have to be congruent. Angle X has to be congruent to angle A. And then 24, we have a shared pair of sides here to give us one pair of the sides. Then we have another marked here. And it wants us to do it based on side, side, side. Well, we already have two of the sides marked, so we need the other two sides to be marked congruent. And to do that, we would have to have BX be congruent to DC. Okay. So that does it for this video, guys. I hope this helped. This is just some practice problems that we're going to be going over in class for a day or two. If you need any more assistance with this, please make sure to email me or join the Zoom sessions and ask for help as needed. Thanks, guys, and I will see you in the next video.